Have you ever considered that the true cost of maintaining a distant territorial outpost isn't measured in military budgets, but in the number of unbuilt hospitals back home? This document completely shifts the perspective on Welcome to Strategic Labs. Like and subscribe for more strategic insights.
Yeah, today we are opening up a really provocative ledger. We're taking a deep dive into a 2026 book by Federico Schinnone. It's called Malvinas Falklands, The Cost of Control.
Right.
And our mission for this deep dive is to, cut straight through all that geopolitical noise. We just want to focus entirely on the top three most disruptive financial and strategic points this text reveals about the UK's continued presence down in the South Atlantic. We're strictly treating this as an analytical exercise today.
Yeah, exactly. And, just to address you, the listener, directly for a second, because this is obviously a highly charged topic.
Oh, absolutely.
We are completely leaving the flags and the nationalism at the door today. We are not taking sides in the territorial dispute between the UK and Argentina, and we certainly aren't endorsing any specific left-wing, right-wing, or nationalistic viewpoints here.
No,
We're just, opening up Shinnone's framework to see what the actual math and the supply chains tell us about the literal cost of geopolitical control.
Which is exactly how the author approaches it, honestly. Like, before he even introduces a single spreadsheet in the book, he makes this very deliberate methodological choice with the naming.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Right? Throughout the entire text, he strictly uses the combined term Malvinas Falklands.
It's interesting because it forces, a bit of a cognitive reset for the reader.
It really does. It
Yeah.
actively bypasses those emotional reflexes that usually cloud this debate. By refusing to let you settle comfortably into one linguistic camp or the other, he basically strips away the ideological padding.
Right, he's telling you to detach from the historical mythology.
Exactly. Just look purely at the cold fiscal arithmetic. And once you do that, the first reality hits incredibly hard.
It really does.
He points out that since the 1982 conflict, the cumulative cost to the UK to maintain this territory has been a staggering 12 to 15 billion pounds.
12 to 15 billion. I mean, for a population of barely 3,400 people.
Yeah.
That is just an astonishing ratio when you think about it.
It breaks down to an annual running cost of roughly 90 to 120 million pounds continuously for 4 decades.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack this, because if you contextualize that, you're looking at an annual subsidy of what, 30 to 35,000 pounds for every single resident, year after year.
Right. It's massive.
If any domestic town in the UK was getting that level of sustained, bespoke central government funding, it would be front page news every single week.
Oh, without a doubt.
Which really begs the question, if the government is spending this kind of money, how on earth is the massive scale of this expenditure hidden in plain sight? Why isn't the British taxpayer acutely aware of this bill?
Well, the book explains this through a really fascinating mechanism. He calls it invisible spending persistence and fragmented budgets.
Fragmented budgets.
Yeah, because there is no single unified line item in the UK government budget called, South Atlantic Outpost Operations.
Right.
The costs are structurally scattered across multiple, totally separate bureaucratic entities.
Wait, really? So they aren't even looking at a unified ledger?
Nope.
Are they just putting the military readiness on one department's tab and the administrative costs on another?
That is precisely the mechanism. So the Ministry of Defense handles the massive overhead of military deterrence, right?
Yeah.
The garrison, the radar arrays, the naval patrols.
Okay, that makes sense.
But then the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office handles the diplomatic positioning and the administrative support.
Oh, I see.
And meanwhile, the Department for Transport might absorb specific logistical infrastructure subsidies, and the Department for Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy takes on the quiet costs of energy stabilization or maritime commercial support.
It's like having 5 different credit cards for your household expenses and never looking at the combined statement. Exactly. You see a grocery bill here, a gas bill there, and it gives you this false illusion that you are living well within your means simply because the total number never appears on a single piece of paper at the end of the month.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. And the consequence of that fragmentation becomes very apparent when you look at how parliamentary auditing actually works.
How so?
Well, when financial watchdogs or parliamentary committees review spending, they do it department by department.
Right.
They ask, is the Ministry of Defense operating efficiently within its overall global budget? They rarely have the mandate or even the cross-departmental scope to ask what the combined cost is of maintaining this one specific geographic location.
So because the cost is diffused into the baseline operating budgets of these massive departments, it never triggers a dedicated localized audit.
Exactly.
It just completely escapes that rigorous cost-benefit analysis.
Yes. It never appears as a headline-grabbing spending spike, so it just becomes institutionalized. It just becomes business as usual.
Oh.
The spending is essentially grandfathered into the system year after year, which effectively shields the policy from domestic democratic scrutiny.
I have to push back on the intent here, though. I mean, standard government accounting is just naturally siloed, right? Departments handle their own purviews.
Sure.
Are we sure this is a symptom of deliberate strategic obfuscation and not just, standard bureaucratic clumsiness where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is spending?
It's a fair question, and Shannon actually sidesteps the trap of trying to prove intent. He argues that whether it's a deliberate strategy or simply standard bureaucratic fragmentation, the result is exactly the same.
Which is what?
A profound strategic inertia.
Strategic inertia. Okay.
Yeah, the inertia sets in because it is politically vastly easier for successive governments to just keep quietly paying these scattered hidden bills than to consolidate them, present the terrifying total to the public, and then try to justify it, especially during an economic downturn.
That makes total sense. The political friction to change the policy is way higher than the friction of just quietly paying the fragmented invoices.
Exactly.
But, okay, if we are quietly spending up to 120 million pounds a year, what exactly are we buying? Because a population the size of a large high school shouldn't cost that much to keep the lights on, even with a military garrison.
Well, this brings us to the harsh realities of geography, and this is the second disruptive point. The book introduces the concept of distance as a cost multiplier.
Okay.
We're talking about an outpost roughly 8,000 miles away from London.
Right.
That remoteness is not just a one-time logistical hurdle. It embeds a permanent, inescapable cost premium into every single transaction and every piece of physical matter on the islands.
Because distance isn't just miles, distance is money.
Exactly. Every gallon of aviation fuel, every replacement part for a generator, every shipment of construction material, it all carries a massive surcharge just to get it there.
Yeah, the freight costs alone must be insane.
Oh, absolutely. And you're maintaining advanced radar systems, a 10,000-foot runway at Mount Pleasant, modern communications infrastructure, all in an incredibly harsh, remote environment. To keep a modern standard of living and military readiness functioning under those conditions requires what Shannon calls artificial economic stabilization.
And artificial economic stabilization requires incredibly robust supply chains. Like, you can't just run to a local warehouse when a critical piece of infrastructure breaks down.
You really can't. And this is where the geopolitical irony of the situation reaches its peak.
Oh.
Yet, to maintain this artificial stabilization, the UK cannot rely solely on an 8,000-mile umbilical cord back to Portsmouth. The text reveals this profound, really fragile dependency on South America.
Interesting.
The UK relies heavily on the very neighbors who actually diplomatically sympathize with Argentina's sovereignty claims.
Wait, really?
Yes, specifically Chile, Uruguay, and Brazil.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it's like building a high-tech, impenetrable fortress, but having to rely on your rival's best friends to deliver your groceries and power your generators.
That's a great analogy.
So the UK needs these regional ports and overland routes just to make the logistics function at all.
They need them for port access, for emergency diversions, and crucially, for what the book categorizes as food-adjacent consumables.
Okay, let's explain food adjacent, because that sounds like a euphemism. We aren't just talking about importing sandwiches and fresh fruit.
Okay, far from it. We are talking about the foundational materials required to keep a local economy alive.
Like what?
Industrial fertilizers to grow local crops, specific agricultural feed and veterinary medicines to sustain the local livestock, like the sheep farming industry.
Oh, wow.
We are talking about industrial coolants and refrigeration chemicals essential for the fishing industry, which is the absolute economic lifeblood of the civilian population there. These materials are heavy, they're bulky, and economically, it's completely unviable to fly them across the Atlantic. They must come from the regional neighborhood.
That is an incredibly awkward posture. You build this fortress to assert your absolute sovereignty, but you rely on the surrounding countries to deliver the fertilizers and the generator parts. It completely alters the power dynamic.
It creates a massive vulnerability, Any minor diplomatic tension, any sudden regulatory change in a Brazilian port, or, a localized shipping strike in Uruguay can instantly choke this supply chain.
And I would imagine that when a supply chain like that gets choked, the UK has to step in to keep the islands functioning.
They do, and they have to resort to wildly expensive contingency measures.
Like what? Airlifting stuff.
Exactly. If a ship carrying critical infrastructure parts or medical supplies gets delayed by regional bureaucracy, the UK has to use emergency military air freight. That balloons those already astronomically high operational costs even further.
But looking at the geopolitical map, why hasn't the UK just recognized this vulnerability and shifted its supply lines to cut South America out of the equation entirely?
What?
I mean, the source mentions looking at alternative supply routes through Europe or Africa or Asia. Why not just build a closed-loop system that doesn't rely on Argentina's neighbors?
It comes right back to the unforgiving math of that cost multiplier. The author details that shifting bulk supply lines further afield to Europe or Africa would cause operational costs to skyrocket to entirely unsustainable levels.
It is just too far.
Yeah, shipping heavy industrial feed from Africa rather than Uruguay isn't just slightly more expensive, it fundamentally breaks the budget.
And I imagine it destroys any timeline for rapid response, too.
Precisely. If a critical municipal water pump breaks, you cannot wait 6 weeks for a ship from Europe to bring the replacement. You need regional agility.
Right.
So the UK is effectively trapped in this logistical paradox.
Yeah.
Asserting ultimate political and military control over the territory requires accepting ultimate logistical vulnerability to the surrounding region.
Which leads to what the book terms the resulting equilibrium.
Yes.
It is a fascinating asymmetric strategic imbalance. Because on one hand, the UK has undisputed global military dominance and physical, boots-on-the-ground control of the islands.
But on the other hand, Argentina holds immense, almost passive regional supply chain leverage.
It's a standoff. The UK pays a massive financial premium to maintain a status quo, and Argentina doesn't even need to mobilize a military to make that status quo incredibly uncomfortable.
Exactly.
They can just lean on the regional partners to tighten the regulatory screws, and the UK's costs instantly spike. Argentina can passively make the occupation more expensive just by existing in the region.
And that resulting equilibrium forces us to step back and look at the broader macroeconomic picture, which is the ultimate question Shannon asks in the book, and really our third disruptive point.
Right.
Having established the inflated price tag, the administrative camouflage hiding it, and the precarious logistics required to sustain it, we have to bring the analysis home to the UK mainland.
So what does this all mean? What does this £15 billion geopolitical posture actually cost the everyday citizen walking down the street in Britain?
Well, the book makes a vital, often overlooked distinction here between affordability and justification.
Okay.
Just because a wealthy G7 nation like the UK can technically absorb a fragmented £100 million annual cost across its vast departmental budgets doesn't automatically mean the policy is prudent.
Or justified. Like, a billionaire can technically afford to heat a mansion with the windows open, but it doesn't make it a wise allocation of resources.
Exactly. And Shannon translates this abstract geopolitical spending into highly tangible domestic realities. He runs a calculation that makes the abstract number very, very concrete.
What's the calculation?
He calculates that the 12 to 15 billion pounds spent on the South Atlantic since 1982 could have built 60 brand new, fully equipped NHS hospitals.
Oh, wow. 60 fully equipped hospitals.
Assuming an average construction and outfitting cost of 250 million pounds each, which is the baseline for a modern, state-of-the-art regional facility.
When you frame the expenditure like that, it instantly stops being a distant, theoretical foreign policy debate for academics.
It really does.
It becomes a very immediate, visceral, domestic reality. 60 hospitals is a staggering figure when you look at the daily reality in post-industrial regions across the UK.
Yeah, the book deliberately contrasts this massive, continuous overseas expenditure with the social deficits growing at home. Think of places like South Wales or Teesside in northern England.
Right.
These are communities facing severe systemic healthcare backlogs. They are dealing with crumbling school infrastructure that has been updated since the 1970s and, chronic affordable housing shortages.
And in those communities, securing funding for a single new community clinic or just repairing a deteriorating hospital wing is a massive, highly publicized political fight.
Oh, it's a huge battle.
Local councils have to scrape and battle for every £1 million. Yet £120 million flows quietly, year after year, to a population of 3,400 people 8,000 miles away without a whisper of public debate.
This introduces Shannon's concept of the benefit plateau. From a purely strategic standpoint, the returns on spending more money in the South Atlantic flatlined a long time ago.
Meaning the UK isn't buying new dominance, they are just, what, paying the rent?
Yes, they aren't gaining new tactical advantages or opening up new global markets with this investment. They're merely treading water, paying an ever-increasing premium just to maintain the status quo.
While things degrade at home.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the domestic cost of losing that capital continues to compound over time. The social deficits at home grow, while the strategic benefits abroad have plateaued.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though.
Please do.
Because anyone listening, especially an economist, is going to point out that government budgets aren't a simple one-to-one swap. The Treasury doesn't operate a single checking account where money not spent on a radar station in the South Atlantic is magically instantly transferred to build an MRI wing in Northern England.
Right, of course.
Money is earmarked. Capital budgets are different from operational budgets. Can we really draw a straight line and say that geopolitical posturing literally cost a town in Wales a hospital?
It is a critical challenge, and the source actually validates that exact line of thinking. Shannon totally acknowledges that government finance is complex and siloed. However, he explains the unavoidable macroeconomic reality at play.
The reality being that wealth is ultimately finite.
Precisely. Even if budgets aren't directly swapped in a single spreadsheet overnight, every pound that the government spends originates from the exact same finite treasury pool.
Right.
That pool is fed by the taxpayer and by national borrowing. Every single pound that is committed to paying an embedded geographic premium 8,000 miles away is ultimately a deliberate macroeconomic choice. It is a choice to allocate national wealth away from domestic infrastructure.
So even if the Ministry Defense budget doesn't directly fund the Department of Health, the overarching government decision to allocate a larger slice of the national pie to defense logistics means a smaller slice is available for social determinants of health.
Oh, yes. The opportunity cost is real, regardless of how the bureaucracy shuffles the paperwork.
Yeah.
If you are committing billions over decades to maintain a remote outpost, you are explicitly deciding not to invest those billions in your own domestic foundation. It is an allocation of finite national wealth, and the opportunity lost is measured in the crumbling infrastructure left behind.
It forces a realization that geopolitical posturing is never really free, and the true cost is rarely found in the visible military hardware.
Exactly.
The cost is the opportunity lost. It's the invisible erosion of capability at home.
And that leads us to a final, really lingering concept drawn from the deep implications of Shannon's work. It challenges you to look at the mechanics of modern statecraft and ask, what if the greatest threat to a nation's enduring strength isn't the risk of losing a distant, symbolic geopolitical outpost,
but rather the slow, invisible erosion of its own domestic foundation required to keep it?
Exactly. It forces you to consider whether modern democratic governance is actually driven by rational, calculated choice and efficiency, or if it is merely driven by the ghost of strategic inertia, a system just running on autopilot, quietly draining resources to fight the ghosts of 1982 simply because no one in the bureaucracy wants to be the one to turn off the lights and present the final bill to the public.
This is just a preview. For the full deep dive, check out our long-form podcast on the channel. See